Microtransactions and loot boxes continue to be a big topic of discussion and contention, with the UK in particular getting more and more serious about scrutinizing and regulating them. EA raised quite a ruckus during their UK Parliament hearing after spouting moronic nonsense about loot boxes being surprise mechanics that resemble Kinder Eggs, about how they're fun and ethical, about how EA disagrees that there's evidence suggesting loot boxes have a link to gambling or that they're harmful in any way. Except just the other day, BBC released an article detailing how FIFA scummy Ultimate Team gambling led to kids inadvertently emptying out their parents' bank account, and the only reason they managed to recover that money was because Nintendo helped them out on the refund process. FIFA, by the way, is a game that's rated E for everyone in the US and for 3 years old and above in Europe, which naturally led these parents to believe that FIFA was safe for their 4 children, all less than 10 years old, though of course the parents were woefully misinformed on that front, with the kids unexpectedly getting hooked to FIFA gambling in their pursuit of obtaining their favorite player, Lionel Messi. But despite having purchased £550 worth of card packs, despite spinning that slot machine time and again, the kids never managed to get Lionel Messi. The trap of loot boxes at work in their full glory, ladies and gentlemen. It didn't take long for this story to spread, and soon enough, other parents began to chime in with their own experience. This led to BBC releasing yet another article, this time compiling testimonials from over a dozen parents and gamers in the UK. The likes of EA insist that loot boxes pose no threat, and yet more cases of these predatory monetization tactics unexpectedly threatening livelihoods continue to emerge. That's the real surprise in these mechanics, consumers finding out that they lost thousands of dollars or pounds to video game gambling or manipulative forms of microtransactions. The article began by quoting a tweet by Tom Watson, UK's deputy leader of Labour Party. In said tweet, Tom Watson linked to the BBC article featuring the story of the kids who empty their parents' bank account by playing FIFA, and then added the following message. This alarming case of children racking up huge debts on FIFA highlights considerable fears that gaming is a gateway to gambling, with boys and girls hooked in at ridiculously young ages by loot boxes. The case for tighter regulation is overwhelming. The UK government is already pretty aggravated by the games industry's negligence with their monetization tactics, especially after that hearing in which both EA and Epic made asses of themselves. But scrutiny is only bound to get worse as more stories like these come forward. Damien Collins, chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, is actually already conducting an investigation on loot boxes in the UK and their potential link to addiction. And when asked by BBC for comment, he said that he believes predatory monetization is, quote, a real problem, and added this: I think there should be an obligation for the company to warn people about suspicious activity, like large increases in spending, just as banks warn their customers about unusual transactions. From there, the BBC article dives into the myriad testimonials they compiled from parents who spoke out against game companies and their scummy monetization schemes. First up, we have Susie Breer from Hampshire, whose 22-year-old son is disabled with cerebral palsy, complex epilepsy, autism, and learning disabilities that make his cognitive ability that of around a 7-year-old, according to the article. One way Susie's son entertains and educates himself is through video games, and among the titles he recently stumbled upon in his iPad was called Hidden Artifacts, which, as the name suggests, involve players finding hidden objects that match a given description. Sounds innocent enough at a glance, but the problem is that the game is plagued by purchasable in-game items, and Susie's son, who is disabled and vulnerable to predatory microtransactions, not knowing any better, had spent over £3,000, his entire savings, between February and May 2019. Susie tried to get a refund, but iTunes was unable to help her despite their best efforts, directing her to the development company Blastworks Ltd. But they have yet to respond to Susie's requests and inquiries about getting her money back. Next up, we have testimony from Susan Taylor from Scotland. who talked about how her son had spent close to £2,000 on EA's NBA basketball game, which, like all other EA Sports titles, features gambling in the form of card packs. She tried to reach out to EA to resolve this issue, but she has all but been ignored. The only recourse this family had was to use the daughter's university savings to pay off the bill accrued by compulsive spending on EA's gambling mechanics. We then have two tweets from parents who had a similar experience. First up is user Ordinary Punter, who tweeted, quote, "My 4-year-old grandson downloaded an app and paid for it with his mother's credit card." Then we have user Alex Ratman, who tweeted, quote, "I used to do small-town tech support, and about 2/3 cases a week were about how to stop purchases on an Xbox 360 at the time." That second tweet in particular is enlightening, as it goes to show how frequently stuff like this happens and how far back this goes. Even during the last generation of consoles, when microtransactions weren't as bad as they're now, this was still a prominent issue. Moving on, we have Annan from West Sussex, who told the story of their then 12-year-old son having spent £700 on the popular mobile game Clash of Clans. The son had his own child bank account opened by his parents, and by himself he managed to enter his credit card details in his own phone after downloading that game. But the thing is, the son didn't know any better. He actually had no idea that the purchases he was making involved real money, so he kept buying in-game items, believing it was all pretend, until he emptied out his account. The parents tried to get that money refunded, but all they were offered was a token amount as a gesture of goodwill. In other words, the issue was just brushed off, and the developers were more than happy to keep the money they had exploitatively nabbed from a 12-year-old. Next up is a tweet from Twitter user Mike Hall, who posted this. It's not as simple as parents should have known better. Perhaps parental control should also be stronger. I have my account tapped up every so often by an accidental purchase. Yeah, that's an excuse I've heard a lot of people make, shifting the blame on parents for being irresponsible, rather than pointing the finger at the perpetrators who perpetuate these kinds of exploitative scenarios. Don't get me wrong, on some level, parents absolutely have to keep an eye out on their kids, but game companies have just as much of a responsibility to ship products that aren't harmful and predatory. There would be no need for parents to be vigilant about insidiously monetized video games if game companies didn't partake in insidious monetization in the first place. Parents are the last line of defense, but the ones ultimately responsible for children spending money en masse are the people who make the products that allow and encourage them to do just that. Not to mention that it's not just kids who are affected by predatory microtransactions. Full-grown adults who are psychologically wired in such a way that make them prime targets for this kind of stuff may not be able to control themselves either. These full-grown adults don't have an overseer or supervisor keeping an eye on their compulsive behavior. It's this vicious cycle they may end up trapped in until they self-destruct. And it's not something they can simply turn off, something they can help. That's not how addiction works. Also understand that microtransactions are still a fairly emergent concept. They're an aspect of video games many parents are probably not that aware of or well informed about, and it doesn't help matters that game companies and organizations do not provide the appropriate warnings, labels, or tools to help parents keep track of this stuff. Ratings boards will label these games featuring predatory monetization as kid-friendly, giving them an everyone rating or a PEGI 3 rating, and this happens in major AAA games like FIFA, as well as major mobile titles like Clash of Clans. The US's ESRB tried to look proactive with the in-game purchases label, but as I've mentioned many times before, the label does not differentiate between harmless DLCs and expansions versus predatory microtransactions and loot boxes. It is a useless label that casts far too large a net for it to be truly informative, and the label in no way insinuates the potential for psychologically harmful elements with how certain games implement in-game purchases. And as far as parental tools go, they're either fairly easy to bypass, they're seldom brought to parents' attention, or they just aren't laid out in a simple and prominent manner. Many parents just don't know they exist or don't understand them. To prove my point, in the last BBC story, story involving the kids who emptied out their parents' bank account by spending a bunch of money on FIFA, it was reported that EA had sent the family a link to a help page that was supposed to guide them on how to stop in-game purchases. But as you can see here, the website is an unintuitive mess that doesn't offer directions, but rather provides links to other platforms' websites with equally exhaustively laid out directions. Furthermore, EA's help page doesn't even mention the Switch version of FIFA, which is what the family had purchased. So for that family, the help page turned out to be completely useless anyway. The fact of the matter is that whatever systems are currently in place are very ineffectual. In-game warnings are non-existent, age ratings are misleading, labels are uninformative, parental tools are poorly explained or easy to get around. It all paves the way for an environment where it's difficult for parents to protect their children or even know that their children need protecting from video games in the first place. Anyway, moving on, we have a testimonial from Julia Pennyquick from Edinburgh, who talked about how her 11-year-old daughter had spent over £100 in a single day downloading apps. In this case, the parent had actually taken the step to ensure that the Google Play Store was blocked from accessing money from her bank account, but some change in settings or something had granted the daughter access anyway, which led to her downloading the same game 3 times and spending a bunch of money that way. From there, we have a tweet that further highlights how ineffectual existing measures are when it comes to protecting people from excessive in-game spending. Twitter user Cy Gilspy posted this: "I think all these add-on in-app type of things should become opted out by default, ideally banned, but hey-ho, and then it needs parental consent to opt in/purchase. Sure, there are controls there, but not everyone understands them or is even aware of them." The next testimonial comes from Claire from West Yorkshire, who talked about how a game called Mini Golf King had successfully tricked her autistic son into spending £300 on in-app purchases. Her son had no idea that he was actually spending real money, thinking that it was all pretend currency, and was inconsolable when he realized what he had done. He was deeply sorry and regretful that he had been a naughty kid. He felt really bad about it, but of course he didn't know what he was doing, and how could he? Claire tried to get a refund, explaining the situation and her son's disability, but the game company refused to accept her request. Claire also clarified that she was in the room with her son when the purchases probably happened, but she had no idea to even be on the lookout for in-app purchases in Mini Golf King because the game was rated PEGI 3, which misleadingly suggested that the game was safe for children of ages 3 and up. When a game says that it's for everyone, it means that it shouldn't allow for kids to accidentally make mass purchases and go on a shopping spree. The article concludes with 2 more testimonials. One is from Naz from Dubai, whose son spent almost £1,000 on Fortnite. And Naz noted how small cumulative expenditures do not seem like much until you add them up over the course of 8 months. That's another important point to highlight. Those who fall into the trap of microtransactions and loot boxes tend to think short-term, believing that a few bucks here and there won't be all that harmful, not realizing how much it all adds up to, especially since video games do not indicate how much a player has spent over the course of their play sessions. They're more than happy to show stats like total playtime and win rate, but total expenditure? Wouldn't want players to become self-aware about their compulsive spending now, would they? It's death by 1,000 cuts drawn out over weeks and months, essentially, or it's like that experiment where the frog will let itself be boiled alive if the heat is turned up very, very slowly. Finally, we have a testimonial from Damien Fox, whose daughter had downloaded a free trial for an app that converts photos into 3D emojis on a phone that was passed down from her mother that was still logged into the mother's Google Play account, except the daughter wasn't made aware that the free trial for this app expires in a week and then starts charging money, resulting in a charge worth £93. This family did manage to get a refund, but the misleading and rather expensive nature of that quote-unquote free trial was still quite alarming. So the common thread with all of these stories is that it's not just about parents being neglectful. A lot of these parents are about as attentive as an average parent would be. It's more about greedy game companies who are more than happy to rake in money by the boatload off of monetization systems they are well aware exploit and trick unsuspecting children, and who won't responsibly warn or educate unsuspecting users about the potential harms their games can cause or provide adequate safeguards. This article article also aptly highlighted why children are especially vulnerable. Aside from the fact that younger minds are more malleable and still developing, making children more prone to developing gambling addiction as adults, there's also the fact that children oftentimes don't know what they're doing. After all, games present in-game purchases in such a way that children don't know that they're spending real money. There's multiple cases of that in this article alone. And even those who are aware do not realize how much they're actually spending, and they don't fully comprehend the ramifications of going on a shopping spree in these games that have been advertised as safe for children and toddlers. And this goes doubly true for mentally disabled kids who partake in video games as a means of entertainment and education. It's dangerous enough that adults who are aware of their actions can become trapped in this vicious cycle of spending excessively in these kinds of games, but it's that much more dangerous when we're dealing with kids who don't know any better and whose minds are still young. And yet, game companies and video game associations, knowing full well about all this, have no qualms insinuating that monetization systems don't have links to addiction or gambling, that evidence suggesting such a thing doesn't exist. They'll have the audacity to try to rebrand them as fun and ethical surprise mechanics. They'll go right ahead and claim these games are safe for kids to play. If government bodies around the world didn't have enough ammo before, if they didn't have enough reasons to break the doors down on a negligent, complicit, irreverent, and apathetic industry, there is more where that came from with this article. And these are just stories from people with the opportunity or willingness to speak out. No doubt there are many, many other stories similar to the ones featured in this article that we don't even know about. Hopefully, more people continue to speak out, to tell their stories, to put a spotlight on game companies' bullshit, to further encourage checks and balances. Let the threat of government intervention continue to loom over the games industry. If they don't want to change their ways, if they won't hold themselves accountable and regulate themselves, then let the government march in. Let them reap what they've sown. If government intervention is what it takes to get rid of predatory monetization and in turn bolster the quality and integrity of video games as well as make them safer for psychologically vulnerable people to play, then so be it. And from the looks of it, articles like these are in fact ruffling government feathers, particularly among the UK Parliament that's becoming increasingly concerned and less tolerant of the video games industry's irresponsibilities. These are one man's thoughts and opinions anyway. I'd love to hear what your take is on this BBC article and the various testimonials it featured in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.